we're going to look at first. We're going to look at the forms that you're going to need to submit an offer on the buyer side. So you're working with a buyer. So you're working with a buyer and you want to submit an offer. What is the necessary paperwork that you have to have completed in order to not only cover your butt legally, but cover your client's butt legally and make sure you get paid? So like a lot of the other forms that we have, you can access them on Dotloop or you can access them through Google Drive here. So we're going to look at them on Google Drive. Google Drive is kind of like your emergency thing if you just want to print them out real quick and then do paper copies. If you've got the time ahead of time and you want to, fill it out and do everything electronically, Dotloop is definitely the best way to go. So in Google Drive, if you go into the DN team folder and you go into buyer agency, you're going to find 3 folders here. They're labeled 1, 2, 3 because they're in order of the way you would work with a buyer, right? So folder number 1 is your buyer consultation stuff. So it's got like scripts and stuff for you to say whenever you're talking to the buyer first, pre-qualification questions, stuff that you're going to go over with them whenever you meet them for an initial consultation about loan types and things like that. So that's what's in the first folder here. The second folder is if you're going to be submitting an offer with the buyer. So the second folder, it's got 2 different breakdowns, right? So it's got the most important documents and then it's got the Keller Williams disclosures. So the most important documents, those are the documents that you absolutely 100% must have in order to initiate an offer. Okay. So those documents are like, if you're doing this on the fly and you just want to get it submitted and you're running out of time, these are your quick documents here. If you want to have a complete file, you need to have these documents here, the Keller Williams disclosure documents, also wrapped into your file. Your file is not complete until it's got both of these sets of documents in it. All right. So now if you're using Dotloop, you can go in and find this stuff on Dotloop, put it into a buyer offer template, and then have it all set up so it's pre-filled out and things like that. It's going to save you time, which ends up saving you money. That's a real good way to have it ready. And then you don't have to, forget about something and you missed a document. It's already in your template, and you're never going to forget it if you put your whole template into that file. So let's look at the most important documents first here. So we have this separate folder. So this is if you're putting an offer in on vacant land. There's a vacant land agreement in there. I don't have. There isn't a separate agreement for a multifamily home because it is a residentially zoned property. So if you're putting an offer in on a single family home or a multifamily home, you're just using the regular sales agreement. It's the agreement of sale of residential real estate. If you're putting an offer in on commercial real estate, you're going to use a commercial sales agreement, which is not in this folder. You're going to have to find it on Dotloop. If you're doing a commercial deal, please definitely consult with me before you fill it out and submit it, because there are some nuances with commercial deals where if you didn't have your butt covered correctly in the contract, you may not get paid. So you really need to make sure that you have it filled out correctly. So if you do a commercial deal or you're going to put an offer in a commercial property, let me know so we can fill that out together.
Heads up, I'm showing your flooding today too.
Okay, sell it.
So 4 units and above are automatically.
Anything over 4 units is technically considered commercial. Now that doesn't mean it's legal commercial. So you might have a 5-unit building that's a big Victorian home in Highland Park that has been an illegal 5-unit for 20 years. That is not commercially zoned. That's a residential property.
So the zoning.
So yeah, it depends on how it's zoned with the locality, not the county, the locality. So you may go on the county website, and the county has that home zoned as a commercial apartment complex. But when you call the city, they say, no, that's zoned for single family use. If it's zoned single family use and it's a 5-unit and they have no occupancy permits on file, you cannot legally use it as a 5-unit. They've been using it illegally. So if you end up selling it and your buyer's trying to get financing to use it as a 5-unit, they may just shut them down and say you're not getting financing because that's not a legal use for this property. So it's really good to know that stuff. Yes.
So like, how would you make it legal? You just have the occupancy inspector come out and say,
With something like that, you'd have to go to a zoning hearing and have it, what do they call? It's kind of like having a waiver done. Hey, Mike, how you doing? So, Mike, what's it called whenever you want to get something rezoned in the city?
variance?
A variance, that's what it is, yeah. So, that's really fun and quick, right?
Takes a long time.
Yeah,
I have one right now that, about 4 months.
4 months, yeah. Yeah, I had one that was 6 months, so thank you, Mike. So, yeah, if you want to get a variance on it in order to make it legal for that use, it can take a long time. It could cost several thousands of dollars. It can take a new survey. It can take remodeling. There's a lot of stuff involved in it. So it can really kill a deal if you didn't do your research ahead of time and figure that out.
So for Natasha's Stanton property, even though it's legally 4 units, they're using it as 1. That's still fine?
4 units is the residential zoning, okay?
So it's only when it's,
So what you'd want to do is call the zoning board, call Pittsburgh zoning. Usually call them like at 9 a.m. because that's when they'll answer their phone. And you're going to ask them what that particular area is zoned as. So give them the address and they'll tell you what that area is zoned as. And then you're going to ask them if they have any occupancy permits on file. And they'll tell you, yes, we have 3 or we have 4 or whatever. If they have 4 occupancy permits on file, then it's a legal fourplex. Whether it's zoned single family, commercial, whatever, if they have 4 occupancy permits on file, it's a legal fourplex.
Okay.
It'll be grandfathered in.
Yeah. On the Allegheny County website, it is 4 units.
Which that doesn't necessarily matter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. In that area, Highland Park, I would guess it's zoned either duplex, triplex, or fourplex. So it's probably at least in a multifamily zoning. You just want to make sure they have the occupancy permits.
So I actually have that question for the Ellsworth property
Mhm.
that I'm trying to sell. We have.
They do have occupancy
They do.
permits. Yeah, if it's the same one that I had sent to you, yeah, they do have occupancy permits on it.
But the person that wants to put an offer on it wants to turn it into like a really large single family, and it's zoned
You can,
R2.
if it's commercial, you can go backwards and it's not a problem. If it's residential, it's really hard for you to go to commercial. So that should be no problem at all.
But does that then wipe out the commercial, or is it just from here on out? You can go back and forth, however.
You can, so if it's zoned LNC over there, which is light neighborhood commercial, so you could take it and turn it into a single family and live in there for 10 years. As long as it's still zoned LNC 10 years from now, if you want to turn it into a 3-unit office building, you can do that. That's fine. So yeah, there should be no problems with that one at all. The Highland Park one, get occupancy permits if they have, or at least make sure they have them on file. If they verbally tell you, yes, we have 4 on file, it's good, then that's good.
I'm calling the locality.
Pittsburgh zoning. Yeah. Which, if you remind me after this, I'll give you their number. I just have it, save it in your phone because you will need it repeatedly.
An offer on that last one.
Okay, so here, these are our necessary documents, and we're gonna talk about which ones. Well, all of these are important, but why they're important. So the first one we're going to look at the affiliated business disclosure for TA title. So this is when you or the company you work for owns shares in another company and you do referral business with them, you need to have affiliated business disclosure. So this states that the Dustin Nolf team has an ownership interest in TA title, and that you're making the buyer aware of it, and it also shows them upfront what the estimated fees are for TA title. So if you're working with a buyer and you want to do a buyer estimate and you don't know what the fees are, you can refer to this. This helps you, right? So this one, TA Title will not process one of our files until this is in, because we do have ownership in TA Title. The funds that we get from our ownership here, so the profit that we make out of TA Title, is what helps offset our cost for team leads and the leads that we generate. So that's why we'd like to refer business to TA Title as much as we possibly can. Not only that, but they do a pretty outstanding job in closing a deal. So this one, you're going to fill it out by putting in the purchase price right here. So that says title insurance for, and you put the purchase price in, and that's of coverage based on the purchase price. And then it's got enhanced sale policy, and non-sale policy. I have a brochure back in my office that has all of those title rates on it. If you don't have a copy of it, make a note and grab a copy before you leave today. That's what you just look at. If the house is selling for $250,000, you look on the brochure for $250,000, and then you just fill in the blanks here, these 3 blanks, and it tells you, who's going to be paying what. So the enhanced sale policy is for residential owner-occupied property. So if that's your buyer, you can tell them, I have to put all 3 rates in here, but this is the rate you're actually paying because you're an owner-occupant. Okay. Title insurance covers the buyer for any liens that were missed by the title company. So that if there's a $40,000 lien on the property and the title company didn't catch it and they didn't clear it before they closed the property, and the buyer tries to sell the property 20 years from now, that title insurance covers that buyer for $40,000. So if the buyer goes back to the title insurance company and says, hey, there's this lien that they missed, I need it cleared up. If the title insurance people can't figure out how to clear it up without paying 40 grand, they pay $40,000 to clear it up. Now that only protects you for the purchase price of the property. So if you buy a $5,000 property and there's a $40,000 lien on it, it's only going to cover $5,000 on that $40,000 lien. That's another good reason to use a very reputable title company, because some title companies, if they don't care, if they think that it's more beneficial for them just to close this and not worry about the liens, they will close it, not worry about the liens, and then 10 years later, you find out there's still a lien on the property, and guess what? Title company doesn't exist anymore. I had one in particular where the buyer purchased the property. He shouldn't have been allowed to buy the property. He was not qualified to buy the property. He was part of predatory loans back in the day, and he had bought the property, closed on it, and was never given a title insurance policy. And years later, so I meet up with him in, I think it was 2010. The property is in the middle of foreclosure. We're trying to do a short sale on it, and we have a buyer. We have everything lined up, and I think we got a done deal. The bank's cooperating. Everything's looking good. Well, the title company finds out that there's a $120,000 lien on the property from a previous owner that wasn't cleared up when that particular seller bought the property. So I go back and I say, well, you find me your closing documents, and I'll be able to find you your title insurance, and that will pull you out of this. That's going to save you. We went through his closing documents. It said title insurance provided by blank. There was nothing in there. He paid for it. There was a number in there that he paid for. I called the title company that closed this property back when he bought it. They don't exist anymore. I found out that they were running some sort of mortgage fraud scheme. They were just pocketing the money, and they weren't actually giving title insurance. They weren't actually paying mortgages off or anything. They put all the money in a Cayman Island bank and took off when the market crashed. So he was just totally screwed. And that's what happens when you don't use a reputable title company. I'm not saying, I don't know who's doing this right now, but when you're using a good title company, they're going to have the title insurer listed on the closing documents. They're going to give your client a copy of the title policy at closing, like TA Title does. They're going to make sure that there's no liens on the property. They're going to be keeping you informed about what's going on. So we had another property. We had some crazy stuff going on, and TA Title came and let me know, we're probably not going to close on time. There's a lot of weird stuff going on with the liens on this property that should have been cleared up, and they're not. It's going to take us a lot of time to do this. So, they let us know that ahead of time. And then, some title companies won't even check for liens until a week before you're closed. And if there's a lien, if there's something going on, you're delayed. I mean, they don't even pull title until a week before you're closing, which is wrong.
And that's when you get into like the buyers could end up owing the sellers.
Yeah. So if you can't close on time because of the title company, the buyer picked the title company. That's the buyer's breach of contract if you can't close on time because the title company didn't do something they should have done. Okay. Oh, and then one last thing on title. So I can tell you personally, I own 6 or 7 buildings now. Out of all of them, I only had one where I actually had a title policy on it, where I looked in my folder and they had given me a title policy. None of the other ones I had ever received a title policy. They never mailed it to me. They never gave it to me. I had to go and track down the title policy for everyone because after that client, I freaked out and I thought, well, crap, what would it happen if one of my properties was like that? So I went back and I tracked down the title policy on each property. Thank God they had them all. They actually had paid for it. But, it's very common for title companies not to even give the client a copy of the policy. So that's one that we're going to use, and we're going to tell the buyer that we like to use TA Title because they do a great job, and we'd like to advise that you use them. Would you like to use them, or do you have somebody you'd prefer to use? If they say I have somebody I prefer to use, okay, that's no problem. And you're going to ask them, specifically, is this a friend of yours or an acquaintance or something like that? Is there a reason? Is there a reason why you want to use this person? Sometimes it's like, my friend's a divorce attorney and he can do this for me and I want to make sure he gets the business. Your friend, the divorce attorney, does not have any experience closing properties. Okay. So your friend, the divorce attorney, could get you into a breach of contract, could get you into a lawsuit, and could cost you thousands of dollars. Are you sure you'd like to use your friend? If they say yes, okay, I warned you. And you can, I would, in a case like that, if they're using an attorney that has nothing to do with real estate, I would write on here, refer to TA Title, they declined, and then have them sign that, and then that covers your butt. And they can't say that you didn't do your fiduciary duty and advise them. So that's an important one. Buyer agency is also important. So there's 2 different types of buyer agency contracts. There's the exclusive buyer agency contract and the non-exclusive buyer agency contract. Which buyer agency contract do you use for an owner-occupant buyer? Exclusive. Okay. So
What was that?
there's 2 buyer agency contracts. There's an exclusive buyer agency and a non-exclusive buyer agency. The difference is an exclusive means that buyer is stating, I will exclusively work with Natasha Smith to purchase my home for the next 180 days. And if I buy a home and I don't tell Natasha, I still owe her a commission. If I buy a for sale by owner and the for sale by owner doesn't want to pay the commission, I pay Natasha the commission. So that's one that you want to use for owner occupants because number one, owner occupants are much more time consuming. They're going to demand a lot more attention. And well, basically you have to really work hard for owner occupants. Investors a little bit easier once you get into the groove of working with investors. So with owner occupants, it's like, we're going to see 20 houses. We're going to see a lot of houses, and I'm going to advise in your best interest. You have no experience doing this usually, or you haven't done this in 30 years. So, there's going to be a lot of advising involved in that sort of stuff. So you want to make sure they're not going to cheat on you, right? It's like you're getting married for the next 180 days. You're my client, and I'm your advisor. And we're going to agree to this right now. As long as you understand that, you're going to sign here. The non-exclusive buyer agency states that buyer will only pay you if you show them a property, if you bring a property to them. you don't necessarily have to show it either. If you present the property to them before anybody else and they buy it, then they owe you a commission. So the non-exclusive buyer agency is not binding for any, well, it's binding, but it's not binding for all properties. It's only binding for the specific properties that you show to that person. That is a good one to use for investors, because a lot of experienced investors will not sign an exclusive buyer agency to work with you. They're going to take whatever deal is brought to them a lot of times. So that's a way, you get an investor call who wants to see Fleming, for instance. I want to see Fleming Avenue. Great. Our policy on showing Fleming Avenue, just so you know ahead of time, is that when I show you the property, I'm going to have a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement that states that if you want to buy the property, since I showed it to you, you will work with me. Are you okay with that? It does not bind you for any other properties unless I show them to you. Are you okay with that? Sure. Okay, great. I'll see you at the property. Blah, blah, blah. Go ahead.
In the non-exclusive, the non-exclusive, do you put in a date range or do you put in a property name?
The non-exclusive is, I think it's binding. I think you do put a term in. We'll take a look at that. Yeah, so it's going to start when signed by the broker and buyer unless otherwise stated here.
And so if they want it to just be for that single property, then you could put that there.
Yeah, and it says they're not bound to any specific term. So if they want to say, hey, I want to terminate that agreement completely, I don't want to deal with you at all anymore, that's fine. They can do that at any time. So with the non-exclusive at the bottom, this is the important part where it says additional terms. You want to make sure that you have that in there. So you have your commission in there, and then you also have the specific properties in there. So that's a decent way to word the commission there. Buyer will be responsible for a commission of $350 plus 3% of the total sale price of all real property, business, chattel, and any other sale involved in the following properties. Should seller not offer a co-op commission to buyer's agent. And then you list the properties or the MLS numbers for the properties you're going to show. That covers you, the way that's worded, it covers you for our minimum admin fee, it covers you for 3% commission, and it covers you on a commercial deal also. So let's say they're buying, even if they're buying a fourplex, and there's 4 refrigerators, 4 washers, 4 dryers, 4 dishwashers, and 4 stoves. So, I mean, that could add up to, let's say we put a value of $20,000 on those appliances. They could say, if it's a cash deal, they could say, well, we're going to pay $380,000 for the property, and we're going to pay $20,000 for the appliances. That way, their transfer tax shows at $380 instead of $400, and they save on transfer tax, and then their reassessment, if it happens, is lower too. So that's something that a buyer would do to get the taxes down. Well, the total sale price is $400,000. This ensures you get paid on $400,000, not $380. Okay, I do this on the residential listing contract too. I put commission is going to be $4,000 or 6% of the gross sale price, not the net sale price, the gross sale price. And then that protects you if you sell it for $200,000 with 6% seller assist. You get paid the commission on $200,000, not after the seller assist. So that's a good idea too. Sometimes I forget to do it. Kelsey will tell you I probably have it in half of our contracts and not in the other ones. I really, should have that in a template, and I don't. But that would be a good thing to put in your listing contract.
So I've noticed on listings on the MLS where it'll say commission is paid on or after seller's assist.
That's net sale price.
Right. So then the buyer would be responsible for that difference.
Usually you just bite the bullet and you take a reduced commission on it.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're showing it and you know that you're going to be getting paid on the net sale price.
Okay.
And there are times the contract says the sale price. It doesn't say net or gross. It just says the sale price. So if the sale price is $200,000, I usually just say it's $200,000. I don't care what the seller assist is. The sale price is $200,000.
Mm-hmm.
But I found especially with investor sellers and developer sellers, if you don't have it specified in the agreement, they're going to argue with you at the closing table, and they want to save money, and then they're saving a couple $1,000 because they want it on the net. So if I just have it written in there, it's covered. My listing contract, when I do for flips and when I do for new construction, it states that it's on gross sale price plus any upgrades. So if they're doing a flip and it's not finished yet, and the buyer comes in and says, well, I would prefer to have a granite countertop instead of a concrete countertop. Well, that's going to cost you an extra $2,000. Okay. Well, I want different cabinets. Well, that's going to cost you an extra $30,000. Like, it starts working up, and it may have been a $350 ask price, and now we sold it for $400,000. I want paid on $400,000, not $350. So we put that in the listing agreement there to protect us when it comes to flips and development.
And what was that specific? What was that like terminology?
That would be, it's going to say for commission, it's going to say $4,000 or 6% of the gross sale price plus upgrades,
Okay.
plus an additional administrative fee of $500. So this is in here. That's already filled out for you on the non-exclusive. If you're using that and you want to do that, you just put your MLS numbers or your addresses of the properties in there, and it's good to go. This is your exclusive buyer agency. I mean, you want to make sure it's filled out up here. If you're working with a developer or an investor or whatever, put their business name in here and then put their full name in parentheses. And then I'll sometimes even put or any other business or partner of that person. So it might say, our property management company, the Full House LLC, parentheses, David Henninger, and or any partner of or business owned by or affiliated with David Henninger. That way I'm covered by, if he wants to change the company on me and I only have that one company in there and I don't have his name in there, then I'm not getting paid. They could legally not pay me. So you want to make sure you're covering every avenue. And there are people who will do that. I'm a skeptic on my KPA. It's a 0 when it comes to optimism. So your buyer agency, if you submit an offer and you don't have a buyer agency filled out, who do you represent? Seller. You're a sub-agent for the seller. So you're not working for the buyer. So that's another, reason for the buyer to sign the buyer agency. You want to explain that to them. If I fill this out and submit this, I'm not working for you anymore. I'm working for the seller, and I'm working for the seller's best interest because I become a sub-agent for the seller.
Is that still done? Is that legal?
Still done, yes. Still done, it's still legal. And you'll have buyers that say, I don't want to be represented. And you put on the contract, the buyer is not represented. And then you got to remember when you do that, you're not there to get them the best deal anymore. You're there to get the seller the best deal. So then you're going to be negotiating for the seller. And I mean, negotiating, my favorite saying is negotiating is lying. I mean, you're doing everything possible in usually a highly dishonest way in order to get the best price for the seller at that point. So the buyer's got to realize that before they make that decision.
Everyone come to the negotiating class on the 26th.
Yeah.
And the duration, you mentioned 180 days. Is that standard? Or?
180 days is that's pretty typical for a buyer, exclusive buyer agency. That just covers you. Kim and Gracie took 2 years to buy a house.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it covers you for a pretty decent period. Most of the time you want your buyer to be ready to put an offer in within 90 days. But, things happen, life happens. So if you got 180 days, it covers you for 6 months. If, something stalls up, I mean, we had no contract for a year or something like that. And then when they were ready, they called me back. We did a new I don't even think we did a contract the second time. Yeah. So I was showing them houses without an agreement at that point because I figured we got a year and a half invested. They're not going anywhere else, right? Which, sometimes they do go someplace else. So maybe it would have been a good idea. but she's here now. So the buyer estimated cost, this is super important to have. You do not want to submit an offer without the buyer knowing what they're supposed to come to the table with, right? And I tell you from experience as a new agent, I did it one time where I forgot the buyer estimated costs, and we were submitting a cash offer, and the guy just thought, well, I'm offering $20,000, that's what I'm coming to the table with. And when I ended up saying, oh, I forgot to do this, I want to show you this, he's like, an extra $4,000, what's this crap? I don't have $4,000. And in the middle of the deal, he can't buy the place anymore. That was totally my fault. So, make sure that this is filled out. Worst case scenario, give them a higher estimate than it's going to be. You don't want to give them like a crazy high estimate, but a high estimate is better than a low estimate. I do it on my seller cost sheets as well. I'll do a higher estimate. Alvarado that we're closing tomorrow, he's walking away with $1,500 more than I estimated. Does that make him happy? Yes, that makes him very happy. When it's the buyer, we want to show them, hey, you're coming with $1,500 less than I estimated. How's that make you feel? Pretty good. So if they have extra stored away because you told them they're going to need extra, then it's not going to be a surprise at closing. Oh, you got to come up with an extra $2,000. They're going to have it. With loan deals, you could have the lender do a cost estimate and then have the lender get permission from the buyer to share it with you. If they share that with you, then you know what the lender is going to charge down here in the lender fees, and you can just go through and fill it out accurately because you have the lender's cost sheet. You know what they're charging.
How quickly can I get that to you?
I mean, usually within a couple hours. If it's
Okay.
Yeah, it'll usually be within a couple hours if you're right in the middle of putting an offer in. And sometimes they'll have. Well, most of the time they're going to be, the buyer's going to be pre-approved, or they're going to even with movement mortgage, they're going to have their loan commitment. So this is already done. So all you have to do is request it, and they'll send it over. Let's say they're approved for $200,000, and you put an offer in for $175,000. You can still look at the mortgage cost and see how that works, because a lot of times it's based on a percentage, just like a commission. So they might charge a 2% financing fee or lender fee, and so 2% on $200,000 is $4,000, and then you're going to take that and figure out for $175,000 because that's what your offer is. So you can kind of decipher it. Your mortgage rates up here. If you go to mortgagecalculator.org, that's a really good place to go in and calculate mortgage rates and even produce amortization tables and stuff. So I go in there, and that's how I get my mortgage numbers for up here. And you just go, once you have the mortgage and the estimated cost filled out, you go through and you just fill this out, and it's going to show them the balance that they need to bring at the settlement. So with a buyer, you should do a buyer estimated cost probably at least 3 times. You're going to do a buyer estimated cost when you first meet with them to figure out what their comfortable purchasing power is. So you're doing that before you even step foot in a house. You're going to do a buyer estimated cost sheet when you're putting the offer in for the offer amount. And then you might negotiate, you put an offer in for $175, it ends up settling on $190. You're going to do an estimated cost sheet then at $190 because that's your settled upon price. So from there, now if you go to your reply to inspections and you negotiate the price down to $188, their costs are going to drop down a little bit. So if they're already prepared for $190, they're going to be fine at $188. So you don't have to do another cost sheet, but make sure you got it for that sale price. That's the important one. And the great thing about dotloop is you guys can go in, if you already did their cost sheet for them for the initial consultation, and then they're putting an offer in, you can go in and change the numbers in there. And so your flat numbers are going to stay the same. And you can change, the other numbers that are going to change. So you kind of already have a template there you can work with. It makes it easier. The consumer notice, I guess maybe that would have been the best one to do first. So the consumer notice is the thing that you're supposed to have them sign before anything else, before you even talk to them. And this is a good way to figure out if a buyer is worth working with or not. If they're afraid to sign this and it says this is not a contract on it, if they refuse to sign that, then I don't even think I'd show them a house. It says right there it's not a contract. This is a Pennsylvania required disclosure that tells you how agency works. So it tells you what a seller agent is. That's the person who's listed the house. Tells you what a buyer agent is. That's going to be me representing you. Tells you what a dual agent is. That's if you want to buy one of my listings. And a designated agent is if I get hit by a car and my broker has to designate somebody to work on my behalf.
Now, with a seller, you don't have to have them sign it until you actually list the property though, right?
Well, if they're going to ask for advice, you should give them a copy of it and just let them know, technically I don't represent you, so I can't really give you good, thorough advice right now.
Mhm.
I can kind of give you some ideas, but I don't represent you in a fiduciary way until you sign a listing agreement with me. So that's what this is saying, basically. So yeah, you can give them a copy whenever you first meet them and say, hey, I have to give you a copy of this. And just, you can make a note, delivered seller disclosure on this date. They don't necessarily have to sign it whenever they meet you. It just says they have to be given a copy of it. So the bullet points are the job duties of a real estate agent then after that. And this is a government document, so it's backwards. You date, print, and sign instead of sign, print below, and date. And I always, like, when I'm sitting down doing a listing, I'll circle the seller's agent. I'll let them know that that's me representing you, because I don't work with buyers. I think I closed 2 buyers this year, which is like the most I've closed in since I worked with you. So I'll tell them that that's like one of the advantages of working with me as your listing agent is I represent you 100%. I will not be trying to get both ends of this deal. I am the listing agent's, the seller agent. And then, even if the buyer comes through my team, they're going to be represented by Natasha or Kim or somebody else, and they're going to be fully represented too. So you know that this is a fair deal that we're going to have. And of course, the last thing is our sales agreement. The sales agreement is an offer until it's signed by all parties. Okay. So when you're submitting an offer, you're submitting a sales agreement that's filled out and signed by the buyer. If the seller just signs it and they sign it within the time frame, then you have an executed contract. If the seller marks it up and signs all that stuff and sends it back, it's not executed until the buyer initials and dates the changes that were made. The execution date is the date where the final change was initialed and dated by everybody. So it could have been, the seller signed or initialed and dated today, the buyer initialed and dated tomorrow. The execution date would be tomorrow then. That's the start date for everything. You'll have agents that argue that the start date is the date on the top of the page 2 where it says this contract dated. That is not the start date of the contract. The start date of the contract is the execution date.
In my buyer deal, they told me to make the changes and send it over. Like we initial and dated it, and then
That's
they
fine.
sign the final.
Mm-hmm.
And does that happen often, or do they generally?
Sometimes, yeah, I'll do that because I'm lazy. But like if a buyer submits an offer, their buyer's already signed everything, and they might make 1 or 2 changes, and I'll say you get it changed, send it back, and then we'll date and initial it. And that also gives the buyer's agent can then just word it how they want to. So if they're going to add verbiage or something like that, they can word it how they want to. And then if I don't like it, I mark it up and change it again. And then I send it back and say, hey, we're good to go, except you have to initial the change that I made because I didn't like the way that was worded.
Okay.
So it's a good listing agent is probably going to tell the buyer's agent to make the changes first and send it over.
Okay.
And the other trick about that, so this is some negotiating. When I do that, it buys us time to get a competing offer too.
Okay.
So the agreement of sale. So we're going to I'm going to go through this kind of quickly, like I would go through it with a buyer, so you can see how I would explain it. I'm going to explain it to a seller the same way. It's the same, it's the same agreement, but we're going to look more at the kind of the buyer view today. So the first page is everybody's information. It's the buyer's information, seller's information, legal description of the property. You want to make note that the property is actually in the school district that you think it is in. If it says that it's in Verona and it's in Penn Hills, we had talked about this the other day, that's not the same school district. So if it says it's in Verona, but it's in Penn Hills School District, it's not really in Verona. It may have a Verona mailing address on it, but it's not really in Verona. So you want to make sure your buyer doesn't think they're buying into Riverview School District when they're buying into Penn Hills School District. So you want to make sure that this is filled out properly. To double check that, you go to the Allegheny County website, you go to the general information for the property, and it's got the school district on the top, and it's got the municipality on the top. Those are the ones you want to look at to make sure it's actually in that municipality and school district. Our information goes in here. Have your templates filled out like this already. So your licensee, that's going to be your name above that, but make sure the Dustin Nolf team is in here. And then make sure that this number's in here as well. So ideally here, we're getting to the point where we're starting to do enough deals. I want to have a full-time transaction coordinator. I haven't been able to afford one yet, and we're getting to the point where I can afford one. When we have a full-time transaction coordinator, they will be doing more than just green sheets, commission statements for you. So the transaction coordinator, back when we had a full-time one, was ordering dye tests, occupancy inspections, scheduling home inspections for you. He would follow up on any sort of paperwork that needed to be done by the title company and things like that. Like Kelsey's kind of doing a little bit of that, but we want somebody doing full scale. And that's going to be why it's important for us to have the direct phone number to our office on there. And you can put your cell phone number in there. When we have a transaction coordinator that you guys are comfortable with and you think that they're doing a really good job, I would stop putting your cell phone number in there. Let the title company call the office and run everything through the transaction coordinator, so you are more hands off of the deal. The less time you spend in a deal, the more properties you can sell. It would also be good to have you want to put your license number in here. It's good to have our MLS ID. So my MLS ID is used for the team. It's 218061. So it'd be good to have the team MLS ID in this contract as well. That way, when if you're the buyer's agent, the listing agent doesn't have to call you and ask you for that information at the closing. It's just there and they can look it up. They can look up our office number and just put all that info in.
What did you say it was?
218061.
That's something you wanna tell them, that it's gonna pop up as Dustin's name,
Okay.
cause then they get confused.
Yeah, they'll get confused. The reason we do that is because in the MLS, all the volume then runs through my name. So our team gets credit for, this big amount of volume instead of us having a little bit of volume here, and all over the place. So what we want is when, Coldwell Banker's looking at how are the teams and agents doing, we want to see, the Dustin Nolf team as like number one agent group in Pittsburgh, and we can't do that unless we're combining all of our volume into one spot. Once I get out of production, it'll be zero volume for me if we're just doing it under every agent's ID number. Question? The seller's relationship with PA broker. So you're going to fill this in based off of the MLS information for the listing, right? So if it's a Coldwell Banker agent, you're going to put Coldwell Banker over here. You're going to put their company info and all that stuff in here. Just make sure it's filled out. Make sure that you check here, you represent the buyer's agent. You're going to click that there. This is for the broker here on this side. So the broker represents the buyer because you're working with the buyer and you work for Keller Williams. The agent represents, they're a buyer's agent. or a buyer's agent with designated agency, or a dual agent. So if you represent the buyer and the seller, you want to mark that Keller Williams is a dual agent and you're a dual agent. If you've been designated to work with the client for somebody else, then you're a designated buyer's agent.
So would that happen if you're a dual agent and they don't want you to be a dual agent and then you have a designated agent?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that, like, you might have a buyer and a seller, and the seller says, I don't want that. I want to be represented by somebody, like, I want to be represented by your broker, or whatever. And then I might step in and say, I'm representing the seller, and then you don't necessarily have to change this, but if you were doing it right off the get-go, you would have that set up like that. Now, if it's Natasha's listing and Rick Schweikert's bringing the offer, Keller Williams is still the dual agency, right? So the broker is still a dual agent, but Natasha represents the seller, Rick Schweikert represents the buyer. Okay. If somebody from the North office has the listing and you're representing the buyer, it's still dual agency because Keller Williams is a umbrella corporation, so it's still dual agency.
So we're a franchise.
It's a franchise, but I would make sure you have it in there as dual just to be safe. Technically, it's not dual agency because it's totally different ownership group, but to protect yourself legally, I would put dual agent in there. In the eyes of most people, it's going to be dual agency.
I have one question.
Yeah.
Kim said that when I was filling this out, she said she normally just lets the seller's agent fill that part in. Is that fine? Like if you don't have all that information?
I mean, the contact info and stuff is all in the MLS, so I'd fill that out. If you don't know if their office is like designated agency or not, or like if they're doing that, I just check it off. If they have a problem with it, they change it.
Okay.
I've had like 2 agents complain that I checked it off for them. So either way works.
Okay.
You want to make sure it's checked though at some point. Okay, the second page this is your most important page. This is all of your dates and numbers and all the important information. So by this agreement dated, this is when you're actually going to write the agreement. So if you're writing the agreement today, you're going to date it for today. That doesn't mean that's the execution date. That's the day that you sat down to write the agreement and get the buyer to sign off on it. Purchase price, you fill that in the number there, and then you write in English there, and then this is going to be your hand money, and it says it's due within 5 days if not specified in this blank. 5 days is plenty enough time to get hand money in, even if it's coming from California. If it's coming from California, have them send it priority mail so we're getting it within 48 hours. This is an important one here. Around here on this side of Pennsylvania, we typically hold the hand money with the buyer's broker. So you want to put broker for buyer in this blank. That states that paragraph states that the broker for the seller will be holding the hand money unless otherwise stated for here. And if you put broker for buyer, that means the broker for the buyer is going to be holding hand money. It's easier to do it that way. That's why we do it that way. And then we have control over the money. So if later on in the agreement it states that if there was a breach of contract or a dispute over the hand money and it's not resolved within X amount of days, so if it says 180 days and 181 days hits, and we have the buyer, we have the hand money, it's easier for us to release the hand money to the buyer because they deserve it. The contract states they get it, than it is for us to track down the hand money with Coldwell Banker and beg them to release it to our buyer, who they may be pissed at our buyer or something like that. Your seller assist goes in here. I usually write in both. If I'm getting 4% and it amounts to $4,000, I'm going to put $4,000 or 4%. So I have the same numbers in each one. I don't like to leave blanks. If there's not going to be any seller assist, you can put NA in there or put a line through it. Settlement date, so that's going to be when we close the deal. It's going to be on or before. So it's going to be this date or before. You can close before this date without having an addendum. You don't need an addendum to close early. If you're going to close later than that date, you have to do an addendum to extend the settlement date. This talks about real estate taxes. They'll be prorated at the time of settlement, which is customary. Conveyance of the deed from the seller will be by fee simple deed of special warranty unless otherwise stated here. Now, if you guys just got out of your classes, they probably told you to put general warranty in there.
They didn't do that.
The thing about general warranty is eventually there will not be a general warranty deed available anymore. So general warranty deed means that, as long as you can remember from as far back as William Penn came and settled in Pennsylvania, this property is free and clear of all liens and encumbrances and blah, blah, blah. That's what a general warranty deed means. When you have a short sale, a foreclosure, somebody dies, you have an estate, that erases the ability to do a general warranty deed, and you can only be issued a special warranty deed after that. So eventually, every property will have dealt with, foreclosure or short sale or estate or something like that. So general warranty deed is kind of just like a customary thing. Now, you can write it in there. The title company will not pay any attention to it, and they'll just give you whatever deed that they can get. Most of them are special warranty deed now that you're getting.
This might sound stupid, but where are they getting the deed from?
The deed is recorded in the Allegheny County Book of Records. There's actually a physical giant book of deeds, and they'll have, like, when you go to Allegheny County website and you look the property up, if you go to the general information, they'll say deed book 6,192, and they'll say page 3,000, whatever. That's where the deed's located. So they can pull them off online now. So they pull them off digitally, and then they take it and use that as their model to rewrite a new deed. They create a new deed with the new owner's information, and then that's what they sign. So, and it right here, this is an important one. Possession is to be delivered by deed, existing keys, and physical possession of a vacant property at closing. So that means that when we close, you no longer own the property, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. You need to be the hell out of there, and you need to have all your stuff out of there. I had one couple that I told them this, before we even listed the agreement or listed the property. I said, when we put this under contract, you're going to have 30 to 45 days to get out of here. You understand that, right? So you need to start packing, because their place was just like a hoarder's nightmare. Oh, okay, no problem. Put the property under contract. We do our inspections and everything. We get through everything. 2 weeks before closing, I call them and say, so how's the packing going? What do you mean? What do you mean packing? I was like you're moving. Remember, we sold your house. You got to move. Oh, I thought we had 30 days after the closing to get out of here. No, you need to be out during the closing. And we ended up closing it. They still weren't out of the property. We signed it. Everybody's irate. Everybody's having a fit. We signed an extension for them to get the rest of the day. It took them the rest of that day and part of the next day to get their stuff out of there, and they still left stuff. I mean, it was not a good situation at all. So let your sellers know that, and even if you let them know that, there will be the insane few that say you never told them that. So that's an important one. This is for tenant-occupied property. So if it's a tenant-occupied property, you're going to select that, and you want to make sure you have the tenant-occupied property addendum filled out. That tenant-occupied property addendum states that the property is occupied by a tenant, and we need to review a lease within 5 days in order to move forward with this contract. If the lease is not provided within 5 days, the buyer has the option of terminating within like 2 days or something like that. So if you didn't get the lease and the buyer's worried about it, just terminate the deal and say, sorry, we got to terminate the deal because you didn't get us the lease. They'll usually hurry up and get you the lease then at that point, but then you have to redo the contract or extend the contract. Date and time of the essence. Written acceptance by all parties should be on or before. So you can put a date in there, you can put a time in there. So like if I'm submitting an offer today, I might put, I want a written response from the seller by tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Be very specific about that. If you're putting time in there, put a time zone. And then that way, if they don't respond by that time, this offer is null and void. If they sign it at 6 p.m. and they deliver it to you at 6 p.m., it is not a good contract unless you go in and have write addendum to extend that period beyond 6 p.m. That's an important one too. Technically, now if somebody were to fight that in court, so like if you didn't extend it and you guys all worked towards the closing and the closing was going to happen, and then all of a sudden the buyer got cold feet and they didn't show up, and then you wanted to sue them, the judge would say, if the buyer tried to use that as an argument, the judge would say, you guys worked in good faith for 30 days to close this. That's not a good excuse. You showed everybody by your actions that you were bound to this contract. So that's the legal side of it. In reality, if you want to just cover your butt and make sure you're safe, you want to extend that date and make sure that that date makes sense.
How much time do you know?
It depends on the situation. If it's a bank, I would give them like 3 weeks. If you're dealing with a foreclosure, I'd give them 3 weeks to respond to you. If you're dealing with a hot property that's probably going to fly off the market, give them a couple hours. You got to use your judgment. We're in a seller's market in a lot of areas in the East End here, so it's a fast market, so you want an answer fast. I got an offer on a property in Hampton Township. That's a really hot neighborhood. The buyers took like 2.5 days to make their decision on whether they were going to negotiate with me or not. And we got another offer and negotiated the other offer. And now we have competing offers, and the buyer's agent is pissed off because we have competing offers. Well, you should have moved faster. That's a really hot neighborhood for you to be dragging your feet.
Is that officially contingent?
No. I gave him a highest and best deadline for 5 p.m. We have another guy showing it today, so we might have 3 offers coming in at one time.
All around ask price?
The one's too low. He's offered $235. We have a full price offer. We have a $235 offer, and then the other guy hasn't gotten back to yet.
That's still more than the ask price that it was last year. That's
Yeah, she'll be happy.
Okay, yeah.
She will be happy. Zoning, you're going to put what the property should be zoned as. So if they're buying the Highland Park property that's a 4-plex and they want it zoned as a single family, they want to put R1 in here, even though it's not being used as a single family technically, or maybe it is. You'd put R1 in here, and then you'd want to make sure that it's legal use for single family. If it's zoned a 4-plex, it is a legal use to use it as a single family. That's fine. Anything below. So if it's zoned duplex, you can use it as a duplex or a single family. Triplex is triplex, duplex, single family. You can't use a duplex as a commercial property though. That involves a variance. Make sure that's filled out. I mean, a negotiating technique, if you want to have an out, put something crazy in there that doesn't make any sense, because half the people don't even look at that. So, if I'm an investor buyer and I'm putting 10 offers in and I want to have an easy out on any of the contracts, I might put like, clown circus or something in there, where they might skip past it and totally miss it. If they,
talking about zoning?
yeah. So if I put like, I want it zoned for clown circus use and it's a single family home, is it going to be able to be used as a clown circus? No. So I could go back and say, I no longer want the property because I can't use it as a clown circus. You got to watch what's in the contract, especially like when you're a listing agent, you get that contract, you got to watch what's in that contract because it can shoot your client in the foot. Fixtures and personal property. There's a bunch of stuff already written in there that's supposed to stay in the property if it's there. Just make sure you read through it and you know if all that stuff is there or not. And then you're going to write in anything additional. So when I bought my house, I got a motorcycle. I wrote in, I wanted the motorcycle. I wanted the lawnmower. I wanted the shop vac. Like I wrote in whatever the hell I wanted in the house, and I got half of it. So you can write stuff like that in there. Now, when you're buying with an FHA or VA loan, they're going to look at that, and if you got crazy stuff like that written in there, they're going to probably tell you to take that out, and you got to put it on a separate addendum because the loan is not supposed to be for the purchase of a motorcycle. It's supposed to be for the purchase of a house. Mortgage contingencies. If they're getting a mortgage, you elect this. If they're not getting a mortgage, or if they can buy it with cash, if the mortgage falls through and they want to be competitive, you're going to waive the mortgage contingency. you'll have hard money buyers who will waive the mortgage contingency. That just means, yeah, I'm going to get hard money. And if I don't, they can keep my hand money. Your mortgage commitment date, if you want to be very competitive, get your commitment date from Movement Mortgage ahead of time, because that's really, nobody's doing that. They say they can do it, they don't do it. Movement Mortgage is the only company who's doing that around here. If you got the mortgage commitment while you're submitting the offer, that is huge. That is powerful. If you're dealing with PNC or something like that, you want to put it a week before closing, because that's probably when they're going to get it to you. I'm not going to go over the details of this here. Please read this thing. I'll tell you, as a new agent, I read this thing 20, 30 times before I had a good grasp of what each paragraph was saying. It's not an easy thing to learn. And I still have where somebody will say, well, this isn't happening with this deal because of this. And they'll name a paragraph to me, and I'll have to go back and read the paragraph because they're making me second guess whether I know it or not. Usually I'm right, though. Usually. Not always. So all that stuff there after the commitment date is talking about if you don't get the commitment date in time, you can do this or this. The seller could back out of the deal. That's another super important thing in a seller's market. I had a deal where I was representing the seller. We had multiple offers on the property. The buyers had it under contract. The buyer's agent was totally pissing me and the seller off. My seller is very much like me, where if he gets pissed off, he will just kill a deal because he's pissed, and not just on principle, not on the fact of any grounds. So he was ticked off. We finally worked everything out with the buyers and the buyer's agent. It was not the buyer's fault. It was the buyer's agent being a hard ass and trying to act tough and not be helpful at all. And we ended up getting a backup offer for 20 grand more than the first offer was. And the seller said, I don't want to deal with these people in the first place. The minute we have a reason to get out of this contract, terminate the contract. And I looked at everything. He had his attorney looked at everything. We came up with the loan commitment was the only way we could get out of this legally. And in order to do that, we had to wait until the loan commitment date expired. And if they didn't have the loan commitment to us, we could terminate. At midnight, at 11:59, I had sent him the termination to sign. And at midnight, we sent her the termination for the deal a week before closing. And her buyers were homeless because she did not get us the commitment letter. She had it in her hand for 2 weeks and never delivered it to us. That's really shitty, right? That's really shitty. But I don't represent her buyers. I represent the seller. And if the seller wanted to terminate it, we terminated it. Her broker ended up putting them in temporary housing and paying for it. And I think they paid for the house that they bought them.
Wow.
So that's what kind of trouble you can get into as a buyer's agent if you're dealing with a seller like me sometimes or my seller. So 20 grand to an investor, if they want to make an extra 20 grand and they are ticked off at you, they're going to drop you. So your loan here, we're still going into loan stuff. If it's a FHA or VA loan, fill this out. If it's not, you can leave it blank. If you're going to get a loan, though, you want to do an appraisal contingency regardless. This is an appraisal contingency for FHA or VA loans. So if they're going that route, make sure this is filled out, and then this is your appraisal contingency for those loans. You don't have to do an extra addendum. If you're doing a conventional loan, you'll want to do an extra appraisal contingency addendum. The thing below that states that if something changes with the buyer's financial status, you have to let the other client know or the other agent know immediately. So if your buyer buys a car before you're about to put an offer in, you guys did that, right?
No.
Wasn't it? Okay.
So we did.
Okay. I had a client who did. They bought a car. So the big thing is if you're going to get financing, you don't want to have a hit on your credit report. So they bought a car right before, um, right before we put an offer in on something. That's a change in financials, right? So if you got more money going out the door than you used to have, and it's on a car or on whatever, they open a credit card, right? If you open a credit card and you put an amount, a balance on that, now your debt to income ratio changed, and that can change the whole deal. So that's why you would want to let the other agent know that. Seller representations. This is the status of water, public sewer, all that sort of stuff. You're just going to check what it is in here. So that's saying, so like if we're in the city of Pittsburgh and we have checked public water because it's supposed to be public water, and we find out there's a septic system there, then the deal is done. The contract's broken and the deal is done. So the buyer can get out of it. That's why you'd want to make sure that's checked. I don't, there probably isn't that situation, but you never know. So just make sure you have it filled out to be safe.
Would the seller legally, to keep the deal alive, would the seller legally be required to connect it to public?
The seller could. So the buyer could submit a termination stating this is why I'm terminating, and the seller could say we will connect it to the public sewer and make it up to code, and then the buyer could say okay, that's fine, and then we renew everything. So it is, everything's negotiable, but always make sure that's filled out, because if it's blank, that means we don't care. If you have it blank and it says we don't care, and you find out that it doesn't comply, the buyer's still bound to buy the property, which is a bad, that's bad. Same thing. This is all of the notices and stuff that used to be on the back of these contracts. Go ahead and read those. That's really great reading if you want to lay down in bed and read a contract for 3 hours. This is a great one to do it. Is the property part of a historic preservation? Does it have any special land use or restrictions? There's your more notices there. So that's all. There's your real estate seller disclosure law that tells you how that works. Seller disclosure is required for any property that is residentially zoned or used. So if it's, even that LNC zoning one, right? So if they buy that and they're using it as a single family home and then they want to sell it with you 10 years down the road, they have to have a seller disclosure because they use it as residential use. That's what it's being sold as right now, right? Like if they live there and they're selling it right now.
Well, right now it's being used commercially, so they don't have to provide.
Yeah, right. 10 years from now, if they're living in there as a single family, they have to provide a seller disclosure because they're using it that way. If you have, so like my property on North Avenue, no seller disclosure. There's not a seller disclosure for it. I have residential units, but it's commercial property. It's commercially zoned. There's no way, you're not going to get a residential mortgage on that at all. It's definitely commercial property.
Although REOs don't have
Bank-owned properties and corporate-owned properties don't necessarily have to fill it out. They should have one that's got lines through it. Estates, you don't have to fill one out if you're an executor or executrix, I think. You can leave it blank as well. It's not really a good idea to do that. So like if you're like the daughter of the lady who just passed away and you're selling her house and you live there for 20 years, it's kind of hard for you to say, I don't know anything about the property. So that could get somebody in trouble. I always tell the executors or executrixes, fill it out to the best of your knowledge. If you don't know about something, just put unknown, I don't know. Here's our inspections. The buyer's going to either elect or waive. So you want, on each one, you want at least one side of these initialed. You don't want to leave a blank ever. If you leave a blank, that's really a wide open thing. If they're going to do something special, like a sewer scope or something like that, you can write that in here. I do believe now the sewer scopes are already covered under the regular home inspection criteria. But if you want to be safe, you can write it in as a special thing down here. Structural engineer inspection, that might be another one you want to write in separate. And you might have a different time frame for it too, so you'd want to make note of that. If the structural engineer can't get in there for 2 weeks and you're doing your regular inspection in 10 days, you can have 2 different deadlines. The inspection contingency time frame is 10 days automatically unless you fill in this box, this blank. I would highly recommend that you either do 7 days or 10 days in here. I would not recommend going beyond that because the whole inspection period as it stands is like 20 days already. So if it gets drug out over the whole period, just if you start with 10 days and it gets drug out over the whole time frame, you're already at day 20. That's plenty long enough in the agreement. So how this works is by day 10 after execution, you have to have the inspections done and you have to have a written reply sent to the listing agent. The seller and the listing agent don't have to get back to you until day 15. Okay, so you could do the inspections on day 1 and get them a reply on day 2. They don't have to get back to you until day 15. Okay, so if we have 10 days in here, if you put 15 days in here, they don't have to get back to you until day 20. So that's why it starts to get, you start adding days and it starts to get like, it gets really kind of, iffy where you might be on day 25 and you're still negotiating replies and you're supposed to close in a week. That's a rough situation to be in because now, some mortgage lenders won't send the appraiser out until the inspection's done or like all worked out because they try to save the buyer money and that sort of thing. And then you're in a situation where now we have to delay the closing and it's the buyer's fault.
I was told to always extend it to at least 15 days. And it's kind of like saved me a few times with like scheduling.
Well, if you're having a hard time scheduling, you can do an addendum that extends it at that point. Really, most home, like if you have 3 different home inspectors on our vendor list, you're going to be able to get somebody in there within 10 days. So, and the thing is, the longer you drag it out, the longer the buyer has to sit and mull it over and think about spending that kind of money. And I'm going to have a $200,000 mortgage, and this is crazy. And when you hit day 20 and you still haven't negotiated the reply to inspection, that's when things start falling through because the buyer's got cold feet and they're thinking, that light switch, they blame it on the light switch. That light switch is broken and they're refusing to fix it. Let's back out of this deal. When in fact, what they're saying is, I'm really scared right now. But this is taking way too long and I'm really scared. So the faster you do it and you keep everything moving, rolling at a good pace, the less likely it is to fall through. And if it does fall through, you didn't waste 30 days falling through, you wasted 15 days falling through. So, I mean, that's my interpretation of this. So the seller's got 5 days after that day to respond, which that's what it says right here. And then the buyer then has 2 days to get back to them. So we're on day 17 already. And after that, it's either going to be take it or leave it at that point. So we're 17 days into it with a 10-day contingency period. That's the length that it can be stretched out to.
But how typical is that? Would someone really use all of that time period?
With some of the agents that are out there, pretty often. I've had numerous ones. Alvarado was one. We negotiated reply to inspections for 3 weeks on that. We had to extend it twice. A Bondview. We negotiated for a month and a half reply to inspections on that property. And that was, we started with a 10-day, and it just kept extending. And when that happens, it's usually because the agent is not leading the buyer. The agent's not advising the buyers at that point. They're letting the buyers get scared and tell them what to do. That's not what your job is. Your job is to give them good advice. So if that means telling them, yes, you had a 30-page reply or inspection report that came back with a lot of little items. There's nothing really major in here. Like we're talking about reverse polarity and electrical sockets and caulking that needs to be done. And you got a window that has a crack in it. Let's ask for the bigger stuff. The window with the crack in it. That's something we should ask for. The caulking, you could buy caulk at the store for $2. Come home and caulk it yourself after you own the house. That's part of home ownership. That's something that will make you really take pride in your home. I think that that's something we can waive, don't you? Like that's how you advise a buyer. Like, how did I advise you? Did I say, let's ask for everything? We probably did ask for everything, but that was my negotiating tactic as well. Usually I find out what the buyer is wants as the important stuff, and then I'll try to get a little bit more because I want to get, if I can get an extra $1,000 off the price or something, I'm going to do it for them. But you don't want, in the buyer's mind, you don't want them thinking we're going to get everything off or we're walking. When you take it to the listing agent, you say, I want everything off or we're walking. You're going to tell them, that's your negotiating. I'm going to tell them that, and I'm going to freak the listing agent out and make them think that we're going to walk over dumb stuff. And then we negotiate and we get what we want, usually. Okay, so we're into, after inspections, we're at the assessed value. It lets you know that if the owner's got a reassessment happening, they have to let you know. And if anything changes, or if they get a notice, like if they get a fine because they didn't mow the lawn or something like that, they have to let you know. They have to let the buyer's agent know about that within 5 days of receiving it. And this tells you how it should get remedied and how many days you have to do all that. If it's a condominium, you're going to check that it's a condominium or a planned community, and then that has different requirements. Like you got to get the HOA or the condo docs within, I think, 5 days or something like that. And if you don't have them, it's really a good idea to send a termination. As a buyer's agent, if you don't have those docs in time, it's a good idea to send a termination over to the listing agent and say, sorry, we got to terminate unless we get these documents. If you didn't, and then you find out, and then you get the let's say you got 5 days and you didn't terminate, and on day 6 they give you the documents. The buyer looks at them and they're like, wow, this is crap. They told me we could have pets, and there's no pets allowed in this place. I'm backing out of this deal. The buyer is breaching the contract because you missed your time frame. So you really got to watch those time frames on condos and HOAs.
So they're not required to give them to you in 5 days. You're required to get them.
Well, they're required to give them to you, but it's still, if they don't and you never terminated, then it's on the buyer. The buyer, by no action, the buyer says, I'm accepting it as is. And that's the same thing with inspections. If you got 10 days to do the inspections and you schedule the inspection for day 11 and nobody says anything and you do it and you send a reply over, as the listing agent, I might tell you, go fly a kite. You guys went beyond 10 days, so you're accepting the property as is. That was just for your use, your personal use. But, as a strong listing agent, I'm going to remind them, hey, it's day 7 and you guys didn't even schedule the inspections yet. What are you doing here? Do we need an extension, or are you going to get an inspector in here? I'm not usually going to let them go and then try to play hardball with them, because that's how you kill a deal. But there are agents who will let you screw up and then, make you look stupid in front of your clients and things like that. So as long as you're prepared in advance, you'll be all right. Oil, gas, and mineral rights. Coldwell Banker uses this all the damn time for city properties. There's no damn mining going on in Pittsburgh anymore, just so you guys know. If you want to be safe, check that and have an oil, gas, and mineral rights thing attached. It's going to say that the seller doesn't know about them, the seller's not keeping them, and the buyer doesn't want them. They don't care. And then you have everybody sign that. In Allegheny County, there are gas and mineral rights in some locations in Allegheny County. So if you're outside of the city, you want to pay special attention to that. But they're really, if you look at like the shale maps and stuff, there's really nothing in Allegheny County that they can tap into. So the likelihood of them actually ever wanting to tap into natural gas or anything in Allegheny County anymore is slim to none. If you're outside Allegheny County, make sure you have that addendum. And if the seller wants to retain rights, you want to make sure it's filled out correctly. If the buyer wants to get rights, you want to make sure that's filled out correctly. Greene County is real big for shale. Washington County is real big for shale. Beaver County is real big for shale. Gas rights can be worth more than the land.
So who actually owns it around here?
What's that?
When we bought a house, which is way removed, but we don't even know who actually owns it.
Yeah, around here, usually they're all sold because all this stuff was coal mined at some point. Like in Mount Washington, that was a huge coal mine at some point. So like it's all those rights are gone for the most part. But who's, Range Resources isn't going to pull up next door and start drilling, behind Howard Hanna. Maintenance and risk of loss. This states that the seller has to keep the property in current condition or better up until the closing. If something should happen to cause damage to the property, the seller's got to fix it. Now, this just covered my butt with the Locust deal. The buyer for Locust said, well, you had an air conditioner listed on the seller disclosure. Where's the air conditioner? I want the air conditioner. There was no air conditioner in the property. I didn't have the air conditioner on the input statement. It wasn't on the MLS. And when they submitted the offer, he had a statement in there that said, all inclusions to be provided as per seller disclosure, which made me think there's got to be something on the seller disclosure that I'm missing that this guy wants and it's not in the property and he's trying to play games. So I struck that out. Well, it's a good thing I did, because if I didn't, my seller would be buying an air conditioner for their buyer. The air conditioner is worth half the damn price of the house. I don't know, the deal's for like 14 grand or something, right? So, I'm arguing right now with the buyer's agent, maintenance and risk of loss. When you guys put your offer in, there was no air conditioner on the property. I advertised the property without an air conditioner. And despite the fact that it may have been listed on the seller disclosure, obviously the air conditioner was stolen, so you're not getting the air conditioner. It's in current condition, and it stayed in current condition. The air conditioner wasn't there when they put the offer in, so we don't have to supply one. So that's what that says. I had a deal where we were going through for a final walkthrough, and that night before, some junkies broke in and stole all the plumbing from the basement of the house. So the day before, and it was flooded in the basement. So the day before we found out that the plumbing was stolen, we had to write an addendum stating that due to that paragraph, the seller would put new plumbing in the property. The seller put new plumbing in the property. We scheduled the closing for a week later. We showed up for the final walkthrough and it was stolen again. So then they just gave $2,500 off the ask price and we closed the deal. That was a nightmare though. But that's like worst case scenario. That's what can happen to your seller because, with that paragraph, if something happens, if a kid throws a rock through the window, they got to put a new window in.
Why would they replace it with more copper?
I don't know. I asked them that too. I told them they should put plastic in. That stuff's crap. We're going to put copper back in here. And I said, whoever stole it is going to watch you put copper back in there, and they're going to steal it again. And sure enough, they did.
Did they ever find out who did that?
No.
Does that clause refer to insurance as well?
Well, so if insurance is on the property and the window's broken, insurance can pay for it.
The seller has to retain their insurance until.
Yeah, I do believe it says that on there. I don't think it's necessary for them to retain. It might not be in there. I don't think it's necessary for them to retain their insurance. They just have to make sure it's maintained in that condition. Home warranties, if the seller's not providing one to the buyer, then it's up to the buyer to get a home warranty if they want one. Always tell them that. If the seller is not providing them one, then you want to give them, the buyer, a home warranty invoice and say, would you like to add a home warranty? If they say no, you're going to put a line through it, put waived, and have them initial and date that they waive the home warranty. That's what protects you with E&O insurance. If you didn't offer a home warranty, you will not be covered under E&O insurance if they sue you. So that goes for whether you represent the buyer or whether you represent the seller. Recording assignment. Recording tells you that this contract's not to be recorded. The thing that is recorded is whenever the title changes hands and there's a new deed, they record the new deed. Assignment states that this agreement cannot be assigned to another buyer unless it's specifically stated in writing already and agreed upon. So, somebody might put in, I might put an offer in that says Dustin Nolf and/or assigns as the buyer. That means that I had just made this contract assignable. So if they sign off on that, they're okay with it. That means that I could take it to Kim and say, hey, you want to buy this property? It's really good, and I could assign the contract to Kim, and then Kim's the buyer now. You'll see investors do that every once in a while.
Would that be wholesaling?
Yeah, they try to do it with wholesaling. There's better ways to do wholesaling now that don't involve that. But you might have like an investor who doesn't have their LLC formed yet, and they're going to put their name and/or assigns, and then they're going to assign it to their LLC once they have it formed. This is a legally binding contract in the state of Pennsylvania. That's what that says there, basically. Foreign Investors in Real Property Act. So this is an important one that, if you have somebody who's buying property from like Israel or something and they don't have citizenship here, you want to make sure that they read that for sure, because there's taxes that are paid. If they would sell the property and they make a profit, they owe a certain amount of taxes to the U.S. This is the Megan's Law statement. So that tells your buyers that they can look up and see if there's any sex offenders in the area, which is a good idea. I don't know. Every damn neighborhood I've ever checked, there's been a sex offender nearby, which is sad. Representations. This states that you get if you're the listing agent, you get your signs back whenever it closes. So that tells the buyer not to throw your signs away. So if I'm representing the buyer, I usually tell them that's what that means. So don't take the sign out of the yard and throw it in your garage or scrap it or something like that. I have had properties that I listed and sold, and the buyer scrapped the sign or blocked it in their garage, so our sign guy couldn't get it, and then I'm charged $150 for a new sign. That's why that's in there.
You might have to do that with Mountain View. Scott had called and said that he was going to junk it if it wasn't taken out soon. I said that it would be taken out, within 5 days, and it was the 5th day. So I was like, it would be today or tomorrow.
Okay. Did you call Chip?
No, I forgot to look on that today.
All right. Check with Chip. If Scott trashes it, he can pay me for it, because that's why that's in there. I could take him to court and sue him if I wanted to. Default, termination, return of deposits. That tells you how the hand money is returned back to the buyer. Usually, this is where you put in the days. So if there's a dispute over the hand money and it's unresolved and they haven't taken it to court and it's 181 days or more, then the hand money is released to the buyer. So if you want to make that short, I had a buyer's agent thought she was going to be sly and put 1 day in there, and she sent that to us, and of course I struck it out and put 180 days in there. So that's like if the buyer breaches the contract and they rightfully shouldn't get the hand money, but the seller never sues them, then they do get the hand money back after 180 days. But I want, for my client, if I'm representing the seller, I want at least 180 days for them to make a decision if they want to sue the buyer or not. This one, you always check that if you represent the buyer. It states that the seller cannot sue the buyer for anything more than the hand money. That you'll have people that ask you about that. That is not 100%. So if the buyer goes into the property without permission and they damage something, yes, they can get sued for that, and they can be sued for more than the hand money. So if the buyer caused some sort of damages, if the seller moved out of the house and bought a new house and they're all moved in and they incurred all these expenses to move, and then the buyer doesn't show up to closing, the seller can sue them for damages that were incurred because they had moved out of their house in good faith that the buyer was purchasing the house. This just covers the buyer if they breach the contract, where like it's just a basic breach, like they go beyond a contingency point and then they just back out. Mediation, that states that if somebody's going to sue, they got to go through mediation first, which is a complete waste of time. So a lot of investors will have you X that out. They would rather be sued or go straight to civil court. They don't want to go through mediation because it's a waste of time. It's not legally binding, so the judge can say you owe this person $10,000, and that person can say I'm not paying anything, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. Buyer will not sue any of the brokers if they have a problem with the property after they move in. Real estate recovery fund, if you feel an agent's done something illegal, you can call them at one of those numbers. Communication with buyers and or sellers, that's an important one. So if the agent delivers something to you, that is considered delivered from the seller to the buyer, whether you delivered it to your buyer yet or not. So in that loan commitment scenario, had the agent sent that commitment letter to me at 11:59 p.m., and I didn't check my email until 12:01, and I didn't deliver it until 12:01, it's still considered delivered to the seller on time because she got it to me within that time frame. The headings in the contract are put in there for ease of finding these paragraphs. These are your special clauses. I'm not going to go over those, but that's what you're going to select whenever you're using one of those addendums. The appraisal contingency addendum is the one that you always want to use if it's not an FHA or VA loan. The last thing is the additional terms. That's right where you write anything special in there. If your buyer is purchasing with an FHA loan, I would write in there that the seller will make sure that the property passes FHA inspection criteria prior to closing. If you write that in ahead of time and the listing agent is dumb enough not to cross it out, then you have stuck the seller with making sure that property passes FHA inspections, and they cannot argue with you about the appraisal that comes back. So if the appraisal comes back and it says, in order for this to pass FHA, the seller needs to put a new roof on. A new roof needs to be installed. That means the seller, when they signed this, agreed to put a new roof on the property. So that's good. As a listing agent, if you get something like that, make sure you cross it out because you don't know what's going to pop up on that appraisal. But as a buyer's agent, I put that in because I want to seal the deal before it's even through the appraisal process. That is pretty much everything. Read these. You make sure your buyer gets all of these, and they're going to initial that they got everything. That being said about the FHA thing, the whole thing about real estate and business in general is that if nobody sues, then everything is peachy keen, right? So if I put that FHA clause in there and the seller just refused to do the repairs, despite the fact that they're legally bound to do the repairs, what are we going to do about it? What can I do if I can't go there with a gun and say, hey, you have to do this? Mm-hmm. The only thing that we can do is sue the seller for specific performance, which typically fails in court. So that's the thing. When you work with some of these investors, they know that. They know that there's nothing that you can do unless you want to sue me and you have the money to sue me. Right. So you'll end up with people who just drop out and they don't care. They know that the chance of them getting sued is slim to none. So, keep that in mind when you put these in here. They can argue with you all they want. If they really want to back out, they're going to back out, and they don't care if they get sued or not. It's not necessarily going to save the deal, but if I could put that in there and I can strong arm them a little bit, and then the seller says, "Well, okay, we get it," and they do the roof, well, I saved the deal ahead of time, and I had to be a little bit of an a-hole to do it, but the buyer got what they wanted. Questions?
You ever work with unapproved buyers?
Unapproved? I have. I mean, I have before. I don't know if you guys got pre-approved. We probably did before we started showing houses. I don't think we had it. Did we have an initial consultation, or did we just kind of show up at houses and start talking?
I think we showed up at the house.
Yeah. So I did that a lot whenever I was not super busy. I would, if I got a buyer on the phone, if they went through, so the first hoop was, you need to call this guy and get pre-approved. If I got a call back from the lender and said, hey, they're pre-approved, they're good to go, then I called them back and I scheduled, and I would just start showing them houses. 2020 hindsight, I wasted a lot of time doing that because there was a lot of buyers who did not buy anything and who dropped off the face of the earth after that first meeting. And I spent, I might have spent 3 hours showing them houses for their first time, and then they never called me back or anything. I couldn't get a hold of them, and maybe they bought something off of somebody else later. But would you rather get them in the office and spend 30 to 45 minutes with them, and get to know them first and see if it's going to work out, or would you rather spend 3 hours showing houses and then not ever deal with them again? So I with buyers now, like even my friend Ed Killey, we just sold that house on Royal Oak to. When he contacted me about buying a house, I would not show him anything until he came in here and met me. He's a friend from college that I absolutely trust to be completely. I didn't care if he was pre-approved or anything. I knew he had the money. I just wanted to make sure that he was serious first and that he knew what he was getting into, and he knew his finances and all that sort of stuff. So we met in the office for an hour before we went and looked at anything. So if I'm going to do that with one of my best friends, I'm going to do that with anybody now.
Another thing about buyers is a lot of them don't know how it works, and that they think they need to talk to the listing agent. That's something to explain as well.
Right.
Not everyone knows that. I've come across that a lot.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're the listing agent, you're going to tell them, yeah, I can, possibly get you a better deal. You want to work with me directly. And if you're a buyer's agent, you're going to tell them, no, you don't want to work with a listing agent because the listing agent represents the seller. And, the listing agent's going to make both sides of the deal, and they don't necessarily care if you're getting the best deal or not. There are some people who would just adamantly, I need to talk to the listing agent. I'm not dealing with buyer's agents. I want to talk to the listing agent directly. Like that Patricia from California. She wanted nothing to do with Kim. She wanted to talk to me directly. Anything else? Lots of stuff. Did you realize real estate was so stab in the back, snaky? And this is just residential. Wait till you do a commercial deal.
That brings me to my closing tomorrow. I've yet to speak with that woman's broker.
Okay.
No.
You really should talk to the broker.
I don't know what to say. Like,